Right, let's talk about racism. I know, it's a real mood killer, like finding out your Airbnb is actually above a 24-hour bowling alley. But here's the thing, folks. In 2024, hate crimes are not just a stain on humanity's underpants, they're practically tie-dyeing the whole damn garment. We're about to embark on a delightful world tour of the top 10 most racist countries. Now, before you start drafting angry letters about how your country is number 11 and therefore unfairly omitted, let me assure you, this list is depressing enough as it is. We're talking about places where racism isn't just some grumpy old uncle muttering about the good old days. It's baked into the very institutions meant to protect and serve. And if you think your country gets a free pass because it's known for its diversity or tolerance, well, buckle up, Buttercup, because this isn't your college orientation pamphlet. This list matters because it highlights the very real, very unfun experiences of people facing discrimination every single day. Consider it a necessary gut punch to our collective conscience. So, grab your passport and a stiff drink because things are about to get uncomfortably real. Ah, Italy, land of pizza, pasta and rampant xenophobia. Look, I know what you're thinking, but John, Italy is beautiful. They gave us Michelangelo, the Colosseum, those tiny little cars, and you're right, it is lovely. But apparently all those centuries of artistic and culinary brilliance didn't leave much room for tolerance. You see, Italy has a bit of a migrant problem. And by problem, I mean a bunch of politicians have decided that the real issue isn't a lack of resources or empathy, it's brown people showing up and wanting, basic human rights. This has led to a surge in support for right-wing parties, who are basically the political equivalent of that friend who gets aggressively defensive when the waiter asks if the food is okay. Now you might be thinking, okay, so they have some loud, unpleasant politicians. What's the big deal? Well, my friend, this isn't just about words. This rhetoric has real-world consequences, leading to an increase in hate crimes and discrimination. Imagine being told to go back to your own country while simultaneously being denied the opportunity to build a life in your new one. That's the reality for many immigrants in Italy today. Next up on our whirlwind tour of global intolerance, we arrive in Germany. Germany, the land of efficiency, beer gardens, and a robust social safety net. Surely they've got their shit together when it comes to racism. And you'd be right, did so, mostly. Germany has spent decades grappling with its horrific Nazi past. They've paid reparations, built museums, and incorporated Holocaust education into their school curriculum. Despite their efforts, Germany is seeing a rise in far-right movements and xenophobic violence. This resurgence targets immigrants and refugees, especially from the Middle East and Africa. Instead of addressing issues with compassion, the far right spreads fear and division. Even the most well-intentioned societies are vulnerable to the insidious creep of prejudice. Ah, France, the land of baguettes, berets, and deeply ingrained societal racism, they practically invented charming. But they've also had a long and complicated relationship with racism, particularly towards those from their former colonies. Discrimination is so baked into the system, it makes a croissant look simple. This isn't just a few bad apples, it's systemic prejudice. France isn't keen on acknowledging this issue. They cling to colour-blindness, ignoring how race impacts lives. Socioeconomic disparities faced by racial minorities are significant. Just look at the suburbs of Paris, often overcrowded and neglected. They stand in stark contrast to central Paris, highlighting deep divisions. The Eiffel Tower won't distract from systemic inequalities. France needs to confront its history and work towards equality for all. Oh, Canada! Our friendly neighbours to the north, known for their politeness, their love of hockey, and oh, right, their deeply rooted racism. Now, before you grab your pitchforks and accuse me of slandering the good name of Canada, let me assure you I'm not making this up. Even Canadians, with their seemingly endless supply of maple syrup and passive-aggressive apologies, can't deny this one. See, Canada has this squeaky clean image, like a pristine snow-covered field. But beneath that surface there's a whole lot of Well, let's just say it's not pretty. It's more like if you dug beneath that snow-covered field and found a landfill full of discarded hockey equipment and Tim Hortons cups overflowing with the bitter dregs of unacknowledged prejudice. For a nation that prides itself on being a multicultural mosaic, Canada has a pretty bad habit of sweeping its racial issues under the rug, like a particularly enthusiastic janitor trying to win an award for most spotless nation. But guess what? You can't just make problems disappear by ignoring them. That's not how reality works. And it's certainly not how social justice works. In fact, all that denial just makes the problem fester and grow, kind of like that weird smell coming from your basement that you keep pretending isn't there. Eventually, you're going to have to face it, Canada. And by face it, I mean actually address it, not just apologise for it and offer everyone a plate of poutine. G'day, mates. Let's talk about Australia, the land of sunshine, stunning beaches and, oh right, a deeply troubling history of racism. See, Australia likes to present this image of being a laid-back, egalitarian paradise. But beneath that sun-drenched surface lurks a darker reality. One that's been conveniently swept under the rug for far too long. We're talking about a nation founded on the dispossession and oppression of its indigenous population, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We're not just talking about a few isolated incidents here, we're talking about systemic racism baked into the very fabric of Australian society. This is about basic human decency and recognising that Australia has a long way to go before it can truly call itself a fair and just society. Brazil. The land of samba, sunshine and systemic racism. Yes, unfortunately, even a country as vibrant and outwardly diverse as Brazil grapples with some seriously ugly truths. You see, beneath the surface of this carnival nation lies a deep-seated racial inequality that disproportionately impacts Afro-Brazilians. And let's be clear, we're not just talking about a few bad apples here. This is systemic, deeply ingrained discrimination that affects nearly every aspect of life for Afro-Brazilians. Think about it. Brazil was the largest importer of enslaved Africans in the Americas. They literally abolished slavery last in the Western Hemisphere. That history casts a long shadow, wouldn't you say? So while Brazil might market itself as a racially harmonious paradise, the reality for many Afro-Brazilians is a different story. They face an uphill battle in areas like education, employment and healthcare. And let's not even get started on the police brutality. Let's just say that if you're an Afro-Brazilian and you see flashing lights in your rearview mirror, it's not exactly a cause for celebration. Look, it's easy to slap on a feathered headdress and pretend everything's fine during Carnival. But the truth is, Brazil has a long, long way to go before it can truly claim to be a racially just society. Right, let's hop across the pond, shall we? To the United Kingdom, a nation that loves to tout its diversity and multiculturalism. And yes, London is a wonderfully diverse city, isn't it? A true melting pot of cultures and cuisines. But beneath this veneer of cosmopolitanism lies a rather unpleasant reality. The UK has its own brand of deeply ingrained systemic racism. Institutionalized bias seeps into every nook and cranny of society. The tragic deaths of Stephen Lawrence, Mark Duggan and Sarah Everard sparked nationwide protests. And let's not forget the Windrush scandal. The UK might like to think of itself as a post-racial utopia, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Section 2. A cuppa doesn't fix everything. Sure, there have been some positive steps taken, but a few baby steps forward don't erase centuries of systemic oppression. The truth is, the UK has a lot of soul-searching to do. It's time for the UK to stop resting on its laurels and start taking meaningful action. South Africa, the Rainbow Nation. Celebrated for its stunning landscapes and vibrant culture, South Africa's journey from apartheid to democracy is remarkable. But there's more than meets the eye. Beneath the hope, deep scars remain. Apartheid's legacy still haunts the nation. Economic disparities are staggering. Education, healthcare and housing struggles persist. South Africa has made progress, but true equality requires ongoing effort. The nation is at a crossroads. Addressing ingrained prejudices is crucial. Only then can South Africa truly be the rainbow nation. Right, coming in at a horrifying number 9, it's China. Now, you might be thinking, John, China's huge. Surely they've got bigger problems than just, you know. And to that, I say you clearly haven't been paying attention. China's treatment of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang province is about as subtle as a brick to the face, and twice as pleasant. We're talking mass detentions, forced labour and re-education camps that make Orwell's writings look like a picnic invitation. The Chinese government calls it vocational training, which is a bit like calling a prison cell a cosy studio apartment. It's a horrifying situation, and the international community is, quite rightly, calling them out on it. But China, being China, is basically responding with the human equivalent of a shrug emoji. They're all nothing to see here, just a spot of cultural enrichment, except it's less enrichment and more erasure, and it's a stain on their already questionable human rights record. Section 2, the Great Firewall of Silence. Now, China's no stranger to censorship. They love controlling the narrative, which is why it's so difficult to get accurate information out of the region. It's like trying to have a rational conversation with a toddler having a meltdown, impossible and incredibly frustrating. Independent journalists and human rights observers are routinely denied access to Xinjiang. It's almost as if they're hiding something. And by almost, I mean definitely. The Chinese government claims these measures are necessary to combat terrorism and extremism, which, let's be honest, is the go-to excuse for any government that wants to crack down on dissent. But the reality is far more sinister. This is about suppressing an entire ethnic group, stripping them of their culture, their language, their very identity. It's cultural genocide, plain and simple, and it needs to stop. America, the land of opportunity, where dreams come true and everyone is treated equally. Just kidding, we all know that's a load of bollocks. The US takes the dubious honour of rounding out our top 10, and honestly, is anyone surprised? From its very foundation, America has had a rather complicated relationship with race. And by complicated, I mean horrifically unjust. Slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, it's a greatest hits album of systemic racism, and they've been playing it on repeat for centuries. Despite some progress, thank you Civil Rights Movement, the legacy of that ugly history still lingers like the smell of week-old cheese. Systemic discrimination is alive and well, rearing its ugly head in everything from policing and housing to education and employment. And let's not forget the whole mass incarceration thing. The US has the highest incarceration rate in the world, and guess who's disproportionately represented behind bars? That's right, people of colour. Section 2, the American dream, for some more than others. Now, I know what you're thinking, but John, America's got a black president. Surely that means racism is over. And to that I say, electing one person from a marginalised group doesn't magically erase centuries of systemic oppression. It's like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound and expecting it to heal perfectly. It might look better on the surface, but underneath, it's still a bloody mess. The reality is, being black or brown in America often means facing an uphill battle every single day. It means being followed around in stores, being profiled by police, being denied opportunities because of the colour of your skin. And before anyone chimes in with the whole reverse racism argument, let me stop you right there. Reverse racism isn't real. It's like saying you're being oppressed by a unicorn. It's a mythical creature that exists solely in the minds of those desperately clinging to their privilege. Well, folks, there you have it. The top 10 most racist countries in the world. It's a grim list, no doubt about it. But before you succumb to despair and start building your underground bunker, I want to leave you with a glimmer of hope. Because amidst all the bigotry and hate, there are people fighting back. People who refuse to be defined by the colour of their skin or the country they come from. People who are working tirelessly to dismantle systems of oppression and build a more just and equitable world for everyone. From the streets of Minneapolis to the villages of rural China, people are rising up and demanding change. They're organizing, they're protesting, they're holding their leaders accountable. And that's where the real hope lies, not in the hands of governments or institutions, but in the collective power of ordinary people who refuse to accept the status quo. So the next time you encounter racism, don't just scroll past it, don't just shake your head and sigh. Speak up, challenge it, call it out for what it is, a pathetic and outdated ideology that has no place in the 21st century. Because the fight for racial justice is a marathon, not a sprint. And it's going to take all of us working together to finally cross that finish line.